Today's tale is drawn from my book, The ABCs of an Old Codger Named Jim. This is in part three, and the title of my tale is My Friend Mr. Widget. I sat on the side of my 10-year-old son's bed, chatting happily after having celebrated his birthday that evening. His mother, Edna, had just kissed his forehead and left us alone for our usual father-son talks. It was frequently my task to regale him with a story of when I was his age. These stories were often true, frequently embellished, but always eagerly appreciated by young David. I thought for a few minutes before starting a tale of my early days in rural Kansas. David snuggled under his blankets and awaited my usual animated story. I started out explaining that this all happened back when my folks tried their hand at farming on a quarter section of fertile land in McPherson County. Those were happy times for me. I particularly enjoyed summer breaks when it seemed like the long days would go on and on. Other than a few chores my dad always seemed to have for me, I was free to roam around on my own and explore to my heart's content. It was during my roaming that I met our neighbor, who lived on a small tract of land, which was somewhat west of us. He lived in a rundown house by Bull Creek. I always thought that the house looked as old as he did, and that was pretty old. But he was always nice to me. I knew him as Mr. Widget, although my folks told me that that was not his real name. He was of Swedish descent, and his name was so unpronounceable that everyone just took to calling him Mr. Widget. I met him on one of my more painful outings when I was about 10 years old. It seems an old barbed wire fence I encountered and tried to climb over had other ideas, and it sent me sprawling. With a cut on my left calf that began bleeding profusely. I sat there in pain, wondering whether I could hobble home before the bleeding caused serious problems. That's when a grizzled old man came up from behind me. "Having a problem?" he asked. I hadn't expected him, and he really startled me. "Looks to me like you have a serious gash there." "I'll bet I could help, if you want. But you should know that the barbed wire there that whipped your leg is pretty rusty, and you'll get a case of lockjaw if not treated. You need to see a doctor when you get home." I just quietly stared as he bent down and took a good look at my leg. "Yep, a real problem." He pulled out a pocket knife from his pocket, and I jolted upright. "Whoa there, young fella," he said. "I just need to cut open your pant leg so I can see the wound a little better." He proceeded to explore the gash and cleaned off the wound with water from his canteen. He also applied pressure and did a few other things with something green that he had in a pouch he pulled from his pocket. That seemed to slow down the bleeding, and within a few moments it stopped completely. I began to feel better immediately. "Thanks, mister," I said more confidently. "I guess I really did need your help. What was that green stuff you used?" He smiled and replied, "Oh, just some natural this and that. It's a concoction the Indians in these parts used to apply when they were injured. Now it's about time we get you home. What's your name, boy?" "I'm Jimmy Johnson, and I'm 10 years old. I live over there," I said, pointing in the right direction. "What's your name? Do you live around here?" "They call me Mr. Widget," he replied. "I can't recall exactly why, but it's a good handle, I guess. And I live just down that path," he said, pointing to the west. "Don't you think we should get going?" Mr. Widget fashioned a walking stick for me from a fallen limb, and I gingerly walked home, being ever so careful to avoid aggravating my left leg any further. But in spite of being very careful, my leg really hurt, and I didn't refuse Mr. Widget when he offered to help me over some of the rougher terrain. It was along our way home that I heard the first of Mr. Widget's words of wisdom. We had stopped to sit and rest for a while when out of the blue he said, "Our greatest glory consists not of in never falling, but in rising every time we do fall." We had just been talking about how brave I was, and I think he meant to boost my spirits by complimenting me on having gotten up to walk home in spite of the pain. He was always spouting such words of wisdom. I guess that's something old people do, but for Mr. Widget, it seemed very natural. Like he was living embodiment of folk sayings for all occasions. And I learned a lot about living life just by listening to what he said. When we finally got home, Mr. Widget waved at Mom and said goodbye, and he headed back the way we had come. The only other thing I remember about that day was when the doc came and tended my leg, particularly the look in his eyes when he prepared to give me a tetanus shot and said, "This won't hurt a bit, son." My recollection is that the shot in my arm did hurt a lot, and I still cringe every time I hear a doctor say those words. I saw a lot of Mr. Widget over the next 2 years. I always seemed to wind up at his house, where he'd be sitting on his ramshackle porch in an old creaky rocking chair, whittling something or other. And as he carved, he would chat about whatever I happened to be thinking about that day. And he always listened as I talked, once in a while offering an appropriate bromide to set the conversation in terms that he understood. One time I was talking about my day at school when I mentioned that several of the guys had been showing off their skills in sports. I'd been impressed, and he quietly noted, "A person who gets all wrapped up in himself makes a mighty small package." I had to stop and think about that for a moment and decided he was right and I shouldn't be so impressed. On another occasion, I mentioned that Mom was really depressed because she couldn't get me a new book I wanted. Their budget just didn't allow for it. Mr. Widget has always offered an astute observation that I still chuckle about to this day. He said, "Poverty is no disgrace, but it's decidedly inconvenient." Where does he come up with those things? As I mentioned, Mr. Widget was an avid whittler. He called all manner of things. As we sat on his porch talking, the most remarkable things took shape under his old pocket knife. He was quick to teach me the intricacies of whittling, and one day gave me a pocket knife of my own. He also gave me a sharpening stone with rough grit on one side and a smooth grit on the other, and he explained the importance of keeping my blade sharp. He showed me the different strokes to use when carving. I learned to use a straightaway cutting technique for fashioning the basic shape of the object being carved, and the difference between pull and push strokes. He also suggested using softer woods, like pine, which are easier to carve. I noticed that he picked up random pine twigs and branches he found on the walks that he later whittled into intricate objects. When he gave me my pocket knife, he mentioned that this was his favorite whittling tool because it always was handy, and it had 3 different blades for use in different carving situations. He also cautioned me on how to use it safely, stressing that slow but sure was the best policy. More words of wisdom from Mr. Widget. One day while I was out roaming around, I heard music coming from the direction of Mr. Widget's house. It was a fiddle, and the tune was an old folk song that we were taught in school. I can't remember the words, but it was very familiar. I strolled in the direction from which the music came from and found Mr. Widget gaily playing a fiddle on his front porch instead of whittling. He was obviously in a good mood and having a merry old time, stomping on his porch like the Old Cloggers at the state fair. I'm surprised the old porch didn't fall down from all his stomping. "Well, hi there, Jimmy," he said as he stopped playing. "You caught me celebrating. It's my birthday." And I was inspired to pull out the old fiddle and play a happy tune. You'd never guess it, but I'm 89 today. Wow, I thought to myself, only 89? Before seeing him dancing and fiddling, I thought he was closer to 100. I smiled and said to him, "Well, happy birthday, Mr. Widget. You sure play that fiddle well, and you can clog with the best of them." I reached over and shook his hand real good. He responded by picking up his fiddle again and playing an even snappier jig. "Come on, Jimmy, get up here and strut your stuff. Just listen to your heartbeat and move those feet up and down. Don't worry about what others think about your dancing. Just have fun. Be true to yourself." He was always fond of saying that. Well, he played the fiddle and we stomped and had fun for what must have been an hour or two. When exhausted, I dropped to the porch and had laid there for a spell trying to catch my breath. But I never did stop laughing and smiling the rest of the afternoon. The next day, I brought Mr. Widget a cupcake my mom had baked with a candle on top as a belated birthday gift. Mr. Widget was always showing me how to do something. Often he would take me with him as he plowed or planted a small plot he used to grow various vegetables. He was a gifted gardener and seemed to know what and when to plant everything and how to tend the garden to make his plants flourish. His secret, he said, was that gardening requires a lots of water and most of it in the form of perspiration. He always grew a variety of vegetables he liked and would use to supplement his diet, including radishes, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, onions, and green beans. He also had several mounds for cantaloupes, which he considered a delicacy. While he timed the plantings of his crops mindful of the frost predictions each year, he was also very careful to adhere to the traditional ways of planting by the moon. This required that vegetables bearing crops above ground be planted during the waxing of the moon, from the day the moon is new until the day it is full. Below ground crops are planted during the waning of the moon, from the day after the moon is full until the day before it is new again. I helped as best as I could at my age, mainly hoeing weeds and hauling water in by hand when the irrigation flows he had set up were insufficient. I also helped sow seeds and set seedlings out on rows Mr. Widget created during plowing. He also showed me the importance of setting aside some of the potato crops each year and their use to start new plants the following season. His view of gardening was that to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. My days of carefree indifference, when I could pretty much do as I pleased around the property adjoining our homestead, came to a close on my 12th birthday. It was then that I learned we would be moving back into the city. Mom and Dad's life as farmers was over, as they were never able to succeed in making our farm turn a profit. Rather than sink further in debt, they had decided to sell the property and return to life they knew much better. Although we all enjoyed our days in McPherson County, Mom and Dad just weren't cut out to live the rural life. But as Mr. Widget was often heard to say, life is not always perfect. Like a road, it has its bends, ups and downs, and its beauty. In spite of this disappointment, Mom and Dad didn't chintz on my birthday celebration. Mom made a big chocolate cake with fluffy white icing, and the 12 candles were easy to blow out. Dad and Mom gave me the mongoose bicycle I'd been wanting with fat tires that were ideal for riding off-road. Mr. Widget even came and gave me what I've cherished ever since, a rearing horse he had whittled from a piece of basswood. It was perfectly carved and it had been prominently displayed in every house I have ever lived in as a reminder of my good friend, Mr. Widget. When he gave me the gift in a neatly wrapped package, he said, "I wish you a good and healthy life. Remember, young Jimmy, there is no cure for birth and death save to enjoy the interval." I thought to myself that his words of wisdom would really be missed when we moved to the city. Well, the move was successful. I continued looking wistfully at my son, still wide awake in his bed, and we settled into a life in the city with no problem. Life was certainly different, but I had many memories stored away from those 2 years on the farm in McPherson County, and I'll treasure them forever.